Hi, I'm daynearvin, and I'm doing a presentation on decision making. This is actually like my 4th or 5th video because I can't seem to use YouTube. So straight to the presentation, and I'll go a little faster. Introduction, and sorry if I'm trying to talk like a minute. Introduction. Decision making is a complex cognitive process that people take part in every day. Crazy, I know. From shoes to hospitals, people decide which to involve in their lives. The purpose is to change perception, to bring about adjustment in the active decision-making process, to bring about action towards a healthier and happier lifestyle. In other words, we want to try to change by knowing the decision-making process. We want to be able to affect that decision-making process so that they choose to make decisions that will make them happier and have a healthier lifestyle. The overview is we're going to go over theoretical perspectives and approaches, risk-taking and decision-making, brief overview of brain structure, affect and perception on decision-making, and then the conclusion. Those are just a list of theories and models. Next slide. Okay, naturalistic decision-making looked at experts, and basically they found a pattern when they looked at experts. When experts were doing things, they found that they recalled experiences, they imagined all possible different choices for different situations, and that they decided the best course of action after their own compilation, simulation, and review of possible choices. Next slide. They found that the reliability of experts relied on the predictability of the situation, the individual's learned experience and expertise, the interaction of situation and individuals, and thus decision-making of experts were based on how much they knew from the environment and the particular situation from previous opportunities to learn. The joint and separate evaluation of options by C. Lowenstein, Blount, and Bazerman in 1999 looked at the importance of the contextual environment. Sense-making process, and they described it as a sense-making process of deciding in a situation with a simultaneous display of different choices. For example, on the next slide, joint evaluation of options is the mode of thinking when presented with 5 different plans at one time. For example, if you have 5 different health plans, you can look at them and then you can compare them to one another to see which the best for you is. Separate evaluation of options, however, is kind of like the example that you gave with houses when we were a different cognitive process. But let's say you go from hospital to hospital, house to house, and you have to decide if that is the house for you, but you're not able to look at other houses that you might visit in the future or the past houses that you have visited in the past. So you're not able to contextually evaluate all of the different options. The evaluability hypothesis describes the significance of context in the evaluation portion of the decision-making process. Like, for example, some variables are easier to evaluate without context, like GPA. Choosing to hire someone on GPA, I mean, if they have a 4.0, they have a good GPA, right? But some are more difficult, like hiring based on work experience. How do you know the quantity and quality of that work experience, really? But the bias in this example includes society's knowledge of GPA and the general scale of GPA. I mean, 4.0 is good, but in other countries, their GPA scales are really different. Joint evaluation is more useful and prevalent when dealing with more difficult variables, as decision makers can weigh options against others, but contextually. Separate evaluation is more useful and prevalent with easier variables of evaluation. I mean, like, for example, GPA, it's easier. The motivation of the individual affects which one they use. If you have an objective motivation of evaluation, then you would have the joint evaluation of options. If you had a subjective motivation of evaluation, then you would use the separate evaluation, especially like if it has to do with consumption. It's like, oh, ice cream, yeah, that's good. No, it's fine. Theories and approaches. Theoretical approaches emphasize the significance of context and environment, usually. For example, the evidence-based decision-making model has importance of environment and context. Recognition heuristic, on the other hand, proposes that decisions are made based on past knowledge and recognition of the choices. Hilbig and Pohl in 2009 performed a classic study on the reaction time of decisions. Basically, what they did was they provided choices that people would recognize and not recognize, and they found that is pretty fast. However, sometimes both choices were recognized, and yet there was still a faster, shorter decision making. This can be explained by evidence-based models because they may have known more about one, and thus this created less conflict, which resulted in a faster and shorter decision reaction time. Risky decisions, brain activation. Engelman and Tamir also performed a classic study in 2009 about how risky decision making led to increased activation in the anterior and posterior cingulated cortex, superior frontal gyrus, caudate nucleus, and substantia nigra, and that the period of decision making included increased activation in the anterior and posterior cingulated cortex and caudate nucleus. So if you look at it, risky decision and decision making both have this anterior posterior cingulated cortex and the caudate nucleus. And thus, preference towards risky decisions and decision making are closely related in the neural networks. Structures are activated in both risk and decision making. This leads to a potential strengthening of using prior risky choice making as an influential reference when making a decision. For example, you decide, hey, I'm going to make a risky choice over the safe choice. And then thus, the risky preference and the decision making preference are both activated at once. So the decision making is impacted. And then the next time, the person will use past experiences, hey, I made a risky decision before, why shouldn't I make one now, towards their decision making process. As they continue taking these risks, the connection between risky preference and decision making will become stronger, and thus paired in activation. So it goes caudate nucleus and posterior and anterior cingulated cortex. They just keep activating until it almost like it's just completely paired up. Emotions and brain activation. Green, Somerville, Nystrom, Darley, and Cohen on another classic study in 2001. They found that there was greater activity in the brain structures associated with emotion in these specific Brodmann's areas. The medial frontal gyrus, BA9 and 10, posterior cingulated gyrus, BA31, and the bilateral angular gyrus, BA39. And that emotion had more activity during decision-making processes in moral personal situations. So moral personal situations almost provoked emotion, so to speak. Cognition was found in brain activation in the structures including middle frontal gyrus, parietal lobe bilateral. These areas had more activity during non-moral and non-personal situations. So when that has nothing to do with you and it has nothing to do with morals, people can think about it more. So Green, Nystrom, Engel, Darley, and Cohen in 2004 looked at how reaction times were longer when participants were deciding something that went against their morals as appropriate. Thus, this finding implicated that extra time taken was due to extra decision time needed. That these brain studies imply that risky preferences and affect may have a huge impact on decision making, in addition to a contextual environment. So it could be that it's risky preference, affect, context, evidence, it all comes together when one makes a decision. So again, it's the individual, the situation, and the interaction of the two. So Peters, Diekman, Westphal, Mertz, Slovic, and Hibbard in 2009 was looking at how people generally have affective thoughts before cognitive thoughts when looking at evaluative labels and categories. People reacted more slowly when dealing with feelings than when dealing with cognitions when they were doing these questions. The next slide, it shows that evaluative categories and labels include anchors such as poor, fair, good, excellent, and that Lerner and Keltner found that evaluation labels can create affect and that attitudes can affect perception. Evaluative labels can influence affective thoughts even when an option would otherwise have no provocative effect on affect. So the next slide, we go over affect versus cognition. Thoughts conflicted with each other more often. Conflict was related to longer reaction time. Thus, affect can play a large part in the evaluation of choices and eventual decision making. When they did the evaluative study, they had the exact same anchors, same questions, except what do you feel about this and what do you think about this? So people rely more on affect when dealing with situations that require faster decision making, because cognitive thoughts will cause more conflict. However, affect may also cause people to make choices with less reliance on cognitive thoughts, leading to less healthy or worse decisions. To summarize, theoretical framework and brain localization and function provide the potential processes of decision making and demonstrates the importance and impact of risk preferences, 1, affect 2, and additional information 3, including environment, context evaluative labels on decision making. Further studies may implicate further research upon strategies to influence decision making, such as finding context and prior decisions and actions can influence consumer decision making. Another study looked at that mask priming has potential significance to attitude change in decision making, and that attachment to parents influence kids' development and their career decision making process. So more research to confirm and verify current studies would be helpful, more to move forward with the application of these decision-making strategies and strategies to help others in making decisions. So further studies should include the application of the studied variables into strategies to influence healthier decision-making. And then the application of strategies can be tested, and not only will the knowledge of science be built, but society will have decided to have an improved quality of life. And the next are my references. Sorry, it was kind of rushed. It's still 10 minutes long, and this was my nth take because I can't use YouTube. But hopefully that was a pleasant experience. So thank you very much and have a wonderful break. Bye.